hours, not 2, sorry. And you will have access about 48 hours. Perfect. The waiting screen, give it a little bit because it has to start up the environment in the backend. But once it's set up, you can then use it. And as explained here as well, so the GitLab agent will be removed after 3 hours because the environment is being reset. Just keep that in mind if you continue working tomorrow or later today, that it will reset your environment. Okay, then let me start with an introduction about our approach to GitOps. If you have any more questions in the meanwhile, feel free to use a chat or QA. We're here to help and answer any questions you might have. But yeah, let's get started. So I have a little problem here at home. I actually have 5 dogs. 2 of them have very short hair. They lose a lot of it. And what basically happens to me is that we're consuming or we're losing a lot of time every day vacuum cleaning the house. Dogs lose a lot of hair. You of course want to keep it clean. How can we make that better, right? So here comes in the approach of a robot vacuum cleaner. And automation helps us making our lives more productive. We can focus on the things we like. So instead of vacuum cleaning the house, I can now do things like having a webinar, teaching you guys how to use GitOps or how GitLab can use GitOps. Silly example here, but basically that's the gist of it. We want to automate our things, and we want to, of course, keep our best practices and implement those even in our automation. Now, what is GitOps? I do apologize for the massive wall of text here, but basically, or putting it simple, GitOps allows us to take those DevOps best practices that we've had or that we already have established and bring those to the management and the automation of not just our code, but also our infrastructure. Basically managing everything that's around it, but keeping those best practices in place. Now, how does that look like? There's basically 3 pillars here, or 3 foundational elements that we have. One of them, of course, is codify, or basically making it declarative, writing our YAML files, writing our infrastructure as code, like we like to call it, writing our configs, our policies, everything that's related to our infrastructure, write that in code and put it in a version control system, in our case, then Git. Afterwards, we want to, of course, collaborate. We want to, of course, put some type of framework around it that we have the ability to track what changes are being made, why are they being made for, but also having the ability to review that code, collaborate with colleagues, actually have that 4I principle, making sure that the changes that I'm making to my infrastructure make sense, and that they also are being checked and not just blindly approved. The last element I would say here then is, of course, our automation. We want to have an ability, or want to have the ability to automate all of these processes. We don't want to manually at a Friday evening or at a Saturday morning update our infrastructure because we need to make a change. We want to automate this, and we also want to make those increments small, as in the best practices we all learned from our DevOps approach. On top of that, and of course, most importantly, is that we want to have that instant feedback as well. Did that change that I make, did it actually roll out? Was it successful? Yes or no? Today, I'm going to focus on the right side that you see here, the pool-based GitOps, and which I'll also show you. It's primarily for Kubernetes environments, and it's also going to use our GitLab agent for Kubernetes. The left side, my colleague Ted will show you, and I will also leave that explanation for him later, that he can talk a little bit about how the push-based approach looks like. However, 2 of these are available, and now I'm going to focus on the pull-based one that you see on the right. Now, diving a little bit deeper into the pull-based approach. How does it work? How does GitLab actually set this up? So, first of all, we have our GitLab agent for Kubernetes. That agent lives in your Kubernetes cluster. Our agent is pull-based, so our agent will then talk to our Kubernetes service on the GitLab side and have that communication based on in a pull-based way. Our CAS server will then on its own start communicating with our Ruby on Rails applications, our GitLab web interface, basically, or Gitly in case it needs access to the source code, for example. The agent is there, our foundation, because it basically allows us to communicate or to have a communication layer between GitLab and also the Kubernetes APIs. Well, sometimes jumping over a slide I noticed. Now, why do we actually want to have this approach? Why do we want to use GitOps? Maybe just not in general GitOps, but also the way that we can use declarative code. Why do we want to build all this automation around it? Now, the first thing, of course, is collaboration. When everything is code, it's very easy for me to document it because the documentation is self-explanatory or is being self-generated by writing the code or by writing the infrastructure as code. By having all of this configuration in one central location, it also makes it searchable. It's a central location. Everybody can search for it. We can learn from each other. We can share our knowledge, but also have the ability to duplicate those environments, not just for production staging test environments, but also a team wants to build a similar application can basically copy over what another team already built, stop reinventing the wheel, and share an infrastructure with each other. We also see a lower mean time to repair because of version control. We can very quickly see if misconfigured infrastructure happens, we can roll back or roll forward because of the way that we have, of course, our version control set up. Basically allowing us to have that if something goes back bad, we can quickly fix it. We have a faster time to value because of the automation, of course. We can be able to deploy faster and more often, keeping those iterations small. We can make basically quicker changes or more changes that in the end then cause less risk because the smaller the change, the easier it is to do a rollback or test them in a better way. We can test for configuration drift. It happens to most of us that we have some out of band changes happening on our clusters. With, of course, this desired state configuration type of working, we can have a very easy way to see if configuration has drifted, roll it back, set it to the standard, but also make sure that we can then log why this configuration drifted. And productivity gains, because of automation, we're not manually doing anything on several servers. We basically configure it once or put it in a central location and then automatically deploy it to our full cluster or our full environment. Already touched a little bit on the point on the right as well, because of course, security compliance, these things happen automatically because we are using this platform. We get the ability, or we use GitLab as a platform, we get the ability to set permissions based on our the environments, but also we have our full audit logs. We can have auditing for compliancy, and we can also set up a process for our compliancy to make sure that everything is in compliance. The better collaboration here, because of the separation of duties, within GitLab, we can configure the 4-eye principle, or basically how many eyes you would like, but also approval rules, etc., so that we can make sure that when a change happens to even our infrastructure, we can make sure that the changes that we wanted to make, but also that someone else looks over it and gives us that better feeling of, okay, this is the right change that we're making, that no mistakes are being made or something is not being overseen. We can also control permissions at a username or service count, because we do have the ability to impersonate RBAC roles in Kubernetes. Now, when it comes to then compliancy, or even being more compliant, we can use the Kubernetes authorization capabilities, as already mentioned before. And so we can limit basically what can be done within the cluster from within the CI/CD pipelines. Lowering the risk of providing what most companies basically do now is giving all the developers unlimited access to the Kubernetes clusters. In our case, with this GitOps approach, we can limit the access of the developers to GitOps, to the GitOps repository, and focus on there then to keep it secure and giving only the permissions needed to make changes. but then have all of the framework, all the security framework in place on the GitLab side, so that you can give the ability so they can make changes, that the developers can make changes, but they don't need to have full access to the cluster, or for example, to production. Now, what do we support? Today, we're going to show you how it works in GCP. For us, it doesn't matter, though, where your Kubernetes clusters is running. We support all the major cloud providers, but even though on-prem or self-managed, we support OpenShift or VMware Tanzu, basically anywhere where where Kubernetes cluster runs, an official Kubernetes distribution, we can basically have our agent run on and connect to GitLab. That's just one of the things that one of the prerequisites, that the Kubernetes agent has to be able to connect to your GitLab instance. If that's on-prem in the same environment, great. If it's GitLab SaaS, it needs to be able to connect to the SaaS environment. All right. So one of the things that we also just recently changed, and this I will also show you today in the pool-based approach, we did introduce a change where you can now use the Kubernetes agent for multiple branches. So it has multi-branch support. And this is important if you're trying to test separate or several manifests in different environments for your next release, for example. So you don't always have to push directly or deploy directly to your production environment. You will be able to set up environment branches and then push on those and afterwards cherry pick back into your production branch, for example. All right. So the next here is that I will show you how it actually looks like in Instruct. Just want to check if everyone has been able to set up their Instruct account for now. And if I don't get any no's, then I will go ahead and start demonstrating. Right, that looks good. So I'll just quickly jump into my test group, make sure everything looks all right here. I have an empty test group here, and I also have here my Instruct. I'll click on Start. And basically, you will see here on the left, I have my GCP shell. On the right, I will have all of my steps that I can run through. You can run through those steps later as well again. So you can do it in two ways. You can follow with me and we do these steps together. Or if you're not into the terminology that much yet, you can also take this as a webinar, follow along with me while I show you how it looks like. And then afterwards, tonight or tomorrow, when you have time, take your time to go through it on your own pace. That's completely up to you. If you have any questions, again, feel free to interrupt me and write in the chat. Ted is here. Also, another colleague is here, Martin, who will be able to answer any questions that you might have. But let's get started. So the first thing here that we want to go is into step 1. And in this step, I want to create an empty project. We already redeemed the group or the invite, and that's why I'm going to go to this right here, and it says to create a blank project, which we will call Kubernetes agent, and we're going to leave all the other settings on the default. So I'll go back to my group here, create a new project, create a blank project. I'm going to call this the Kubernetes agent. As you can see, it automatically puts it in the right group, which is the one that we just created. And all the other settings I'm going to leave and just going to click on create project. Important that you leave the initialize README checkbox checked there though. All right, that was the first step. Let's go back and see what the next step is. So the next step is going to be that we're going to use, or we're going to go to the left, and we're going to use the web IDE to start creating some new files. Or in this case, we're going to create a couple of folders, and afterwards, we're going to create a file in that. So let me go back. I am here in my overview. If you would have clicked somewhere else, just click again here on Kubernetes agent, which will bring you back to this page. Or you can also go, as the instructions explain, go here to repository and click on files. And then we're going to click on web IDE. This is going to bring up that new IDE that I've mentioned before. And here we're going to need to create a couple of folders. The first folder we're going to create is a .GitLab folder right here. Click on enter. And as long as this folder is selected, we can now start creating additional ones. So I want to create an agents folder. This is where we're going to basically write the configuration of our GitLab Kubernetes agent. And I'm going to create the last one, which is going to be the name of the agent, which in my case is primary agent. If I go back here, it says as well, this was step 2. So we've created those 2 directories, or 3 directories, basically, the GitLab directory, the agents directory, and then the name of the agent, which is a directory. It's not a file. This is going to be, again, a directory. Within there, we have to create a config file. So once we are in there, we're going to click on new file. Very important here, the file extension has to be YAML written out completely, not just YML. If you do, it will not be picked up by our agent, and it will look like it's not working because it basically isn't. And then renaming it, you will be able to select everything. So we're going to create that config file, and inside the config file, we're going to put this content in here. One thing to keep in mind is that we're going to replace a little part in it, which is where it says here your group path. It explains here as well with an example, but I will show you in a bit how that would look like. So let me copy this first. And we're going to create a new file here, which is this little icon here on the left. And it's called config.yaml. Important here again, write YAML out completely. I'm going to paste in the code that I just copied, and we have to update the path that we have here. Now we can very easily copy that from our project, from the different tab that we have open here. We basically see that we have GitLab Lawrence Lab, and then we have the environments, the session, and our group name. And what we need is from here, from the environments, until at the end of my group name, just before the Kubernetes agent. That's what I need to copy. Going back, I'll replace that right here. There you go. Make sure that there's no extra slashes or trailing slashes in there. And that looks good to me. And if I go back here, it then tells me to go to source control, add a commit message, and then commit it to the branch. So I'll just say that I added my Kubernetes agent config. I'm going to commit and very carefully select here no, so it doesn't create a new feature branch for me. It pushes to the main branch or the current branch, basically. Once it does that, it tells me as well to go back to the project. I have 2 tabs open, so I can switch between my tabs. If you've accidentally closed the other one, feel free to click on Go to Project here, and you'll be brought back to the page right here. And you will see that a new directory has been created, and you can also see the config file that is in there. Okay. Perfect. Now we've done step 1 and 2. Now we'll go to step 3, which is basically we're going to connect our Kubernetes cluster, the one that's going to be hosted here in GCP, connect it to GitLab so that we can then afterwards push some changes to it. So as it explains here, you need to go in GitLab to the infrastructure Kubernetes cluster section, click on connect on cluster, and click on register, which is going to show me a script. So let's do that. Going back here to my main, I go back to my infrastructure and my Kubernetes cluster, and I'll click on generate or connect Kubernetes cluster. Now, if I open this dropdown, you will automatically see that primary agent pops up. And that's important to select the one here that we've just created. If you gave it a different name, please still then select the one that you created. It's important that we use the one that we just create this configuration file for, because we're going to make some changes to it, and that's why we need to see that. So I'll click on primary agent and click on register, and it's going to give me this command. Now, this command you should copy and keep somewhere safe in the case that you accidentally close it, because the token that has been created here has only been given once, so you can only see it once here. So copy it, maybe put it locally in a document in another tab, like I will do here, just in case. And then we'll continue on, which is basically we're going to execute this in the prompt that we see here on the left. So basically, this step is now finished. We clicked on the register new button and the token has been created. The next step is basically going to be here, step 4, installing the agent on cluster. You see here on the left that I have a little window here, and maybe I can make that a little bit bigger. You see that I have a window here, which is basically our GCP shell, allowing us to run commands in Google Cloud. And in my case here, I can communicate as well with the Kubernetes cluster that's already at hand there. For example, I can do a kubectl, get nodes, and I can see that if it comes back, there we go, that we have 3 Kubernetes nodes available there, which I can run my workloads on. Now I know that the cluster is up. I know that my GCP shell here on the left is working. I can run the Helm command that I just copied over. So I'll paste that here, which is basically the command that I just mentioned that we should copy and keep somewhere safe, because it also has that configuration token in it, and just click on enter, and then it will start installing the agent. Right. So we see here it was successful and deployed. And if I now go back to my Kubernetes agent, or basically the view where I registered my Kubernetes agent, I can click on close here, refresh this page. And then once it loads, or it doesn't load. Okay, it sometimes does this in our demo environments. Doesn't matter though, the agent is connected and we can continue with the workshop. But if this error happens, don't worry about it. It sometimes shows up in our labs. It still means that we can continue on. So the next step we have here is step 5. We're going to add our manifests. We can see here as well, we're going to go back into our web IDE in a bit. We're going to create an Nginx file where we're basically going to deploy an Nginx deployment on our Kubernetes cluster. But instead of then using a CI/CD pipeline to push it, our GitOps agent or our Kubernetes agent is basically going to deploy it for us. So what I'll do here is, first of all, go back into my IDE. And as it mentions here, we're going to create a folder called manifests. And I'm going to create under there an nginx.yaml file. So I'll create a new folder here first, which is called manifests. And underneath that, I will create a file called nginx.yaml. Here, I'll paste that information that is right here. And then I will add or push that again to my branch, which in my case here would be add an Nginx deployment. And I'll commit and push it to, again, my current branch, which is the main branch. So selecting no, basically. Going down, it basically then allows me, or what I can do now is do a kubectl get pods. And if we wait a couple of seconds, we will see that our pods are going to be deployed there. There we go. So 2 of the containers are being created, or 2 of the deployments are being created. And now we're basically in the starting stage. But if I do it one more time, they're running with an age of 13 seconds. If I want to, I can also get the logs of Kubernetes or of our agent. It does explain here a command that we could use. However, as it not always works like that, we can do it like this. We have our runner right here that we can copy, or agent, sorry, that we can copy. So what you can do is, if something happens and it's not working as expected, we can tail the logs in their namespace, which is the GitLab agent primary agent namespace. We can basically see if a change is being picked up. And this can also be interesting in a later point where I'm going to make some changes on the GitLab side. We're going to change some things in our manifest files, how our log files, or how basically our agent is going to pick up this change here in a bit. All right, then the next step. This was cool. We deployed basically a single or a simple application onto our Kubernetes cluster. How can we now make changes, or how does it actually work then in real life when we do make some changes to our manifests or to our configuration? So it basically says here to go back to our IDE. And once we are in our IDE, we are going to drill down to the manifest folder, and we're going to change our replicas count from 2 to 3. So let me go back to my IDE here. In my manifest, I have here 2 replicas. I'm going to turn this into 3. Scaled up. Committed to my main branch. There we go. Has been committed. And now we can basically see here in a couple of seconds, we're going to see that a change will have been picked up in the log file, and it's going to make this change into our cluster. There we go. So it picked up that the replicas was 2, now 3. It's adding that extra load or that extra machine. And if I now go out of this log file here and do again a kubectl get pods, we can see that we now have 3 instead of 2. Now, same thing happens again, of course, in the other direction. If I go back to my IDE and I change this from instead of 2 to 1, again, scale down, committed again to my main branch, I can again see that if I wait a couple of seconds, that it already picked up this change as well. And you can see that it's read that the deployment has a replica of 1. So it's going to start removing those other replicas. So if I go here again and check my pods now, there's only going to be 1 left. That's how simple it actually works. Once the agent is configured, we can change and update our manifest files. Again, going through that full workflow, having merge requests open, making our changes, collaborating with my colleagues, having that audit trail of the changes that I'm making, but then once deployed or once actually pushed to my branch, the GitLab's agent will automatically take care of deploying it to my infrastructure. Now, in the beginning, I also mentioned that we now support multiple branches, and this can be interesting if you want to make a change, but don't want to push it immediately to production. You want to test this out on a staging environment or a test environment first. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our web IDE. Sorry, we're not going to go back to our web IDE. We're going to first create a new branch. I'm going to call this branch the Nginx branch. And from there out, we're going to use our web IDE to change that manifest Nginx file that we had before. Mainly here, we're going to change the name of the deployment to the secret Nginx pods. Then afterwards, we're going to push that. We're going to change some configuration parameters again, and I will show you one by one how that works in our agent, so that the agent will then only pick up this branch, and then you'll see how it actually makes this change to the cluster. So let's first start with making that new branch. So I'll go back to GitLab, to my project by just selecting the top left here, my project name. I'm going to click on the plus here and say, in this repository, I would like to create a new branch. This branch, as I mentioned, is called nginx-branch, and we're going to create it based on the main branch because there's no other. Let me create it here. And by making sure that nginx branch here is selected, we're then going to click on Web IDE. So we're sure that we basically have the right branch selected. Once loaded, you can confirm this at the bottom left. You'll see that the nginx branch is selected. I'll go to my manifests and to my nginx file. And basically the only change that we're going to make, but feel free to copy this full file, is we're going to change the name of, or I'll copy it as completely as well. We're going to change the name of the file, of the deployment here. So again, change that right here. And I will push that. Change deployment name. In this case, when I click on commit, I still have to select no because I want to push to the current branch. In this case, it will push to the nginx branch. Once I've done that and basically implemented this change, the next thing that we want to do is we want to update that primary agent, our Kubernetes agent, to no longer look for the main branch for changes to happen, but actually start looking at that new branch that we've just created. So the first thing we're going to do is go back to our main page, make sure that we select the main branch again. So we're no longer going to work on the nginx branch. We're going to go back to the main or the default branch. Once we're here, we'll open the Web IDE once more. And here we're going to make a change into our GitLab configuration file. Now, as I mentioned, we need to, at some way, give the agent the message or the configuration that it has to look at this additional branch that we've just created. And for that, we basically add this reference right here. And for me, what I will do is I'm just going to copy this because I also have to fill in my group path again, where we're going to add a reference here, which is going to be a reference for the branch, nginx branch. Now be careful, this is YAML. Indentations are important, so make sure that the indentations are correct. If not, feel free to copy the full file here, but don't forget that you have to replace your path here again. So let me go back here and update or write a commit message, updated agent branch. And I'll push it again to the main branch. Now, when we go here, I've made this change. I quickly want to check the log files, and already has it picked up the change. Good thing that I was that quick. And it seen that there is a completely new deployment happening. And what it does then is two things. It destroys the old deployment because it's no longer there. And if it's not defined, then it shouldn't be there. And then it automatically creates a new deployment with this new name, which is called secret nginx pods. So if I go back and do now a kubectl get pods, you will see that I have two running and with the name secret nginx. Simple as that. Once all of that is done, you can click on next, and that's basically the end of this challenge. And if I go back into my slides, the next slide is basically the push-based approach, and I would like to hand off to my colleague Ted, who will teach you a little bit more about push-based and how that looks like.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So let's see. I need to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. All right. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen here. And so, yeah, as mentioned, what I would like to talk about next really is looking into more detail around the push-based approach. And now, that's the next step. Afterwards, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can potentially transfer this project. And then finally, we will finish things up with a conclusion. So just to review, Lars just walked us through the pull-based approach to GitOps that we can see over here on the right-hand side. Here we leverage the GitLab agent that we installed into our Kubernetes cluster that continuously observes our configurations within GitLab, pulls any changes that occur, and updates the cluster accordingly. So what we're going to focus on is the left-hand side here, the push-based approach. And what we can do here is we can leverage not only a Kubernetes environment, but also really non-Kubernetes environments and take various different approaches on how to do this. Specifically in this webinar, what we're going to be looking at is the GitLab CI/CD workflow for Kubernetes. With that, we can securely connect to our Kubernetes cluster directly from our CI/CD pipeline. We can leverage the GitLab agent introduced in that first section to connect, and thereby removing the need to expose your cluster to the internet. Now, by default, the CI/CD tunnel inherits all the permissions from the service account used to install the agent. However, we can also leverage more fine-tuned and fine-grained permissions in conjunction with the CI/CD tunnel to restrict and manage access to your clusters by, for example, impersonating the CI/CD jobs that accesses the cluster or specific users and system accounts. So with that, what actually is the GitOps flow? So everything starts over on the left-hand side. Here we create an issue to document the work that needs to be done. That is then followed by a merge request, which is created to allow our users to address the just created issue. Changes that are made are then committed, at which point our CI pipelines are run, which includes security and validation jobs. You can also create ephemeral instances in here to reflect those changes and review and run additional tests like DAST. And then finally, once approved, you can merge these changes into your main branch, after which the appropriate changes will be reflected in your cluster by leveraging the agent. The agent will also be able to resolve drift. So for example, if someone does make manual changes to the cluster will be brought back into conformance. And all the way on the bottom, we see here, we do get feedback, which is then used and generated to really restart this loop again. Now, one thing to note is that with 15.7, we've also introduced the option to leverage a single GitLab client or a single GitLab agent, apologies, for any of the projects that you might have within your personal namespace. So that kind of as an overview. And yeah, now let's get our hands on and start working with a push-based approach. So what I have open here is the second section. So, and I am open to step one. And if we look at step one, starts off and says we should be in the IDE for the Kubernetes project or Kubernetes agent. If we're not, we can go back to the Kubernetes agent project. So, which is over here. If you don't have it, you can always just use the breadcrumbs, get back to your group, and then click on the Kubernetes agent. And then from here, basically what we want to do is open the web IDE. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now, with the web IDE open, we go to the second step here, which is opening the config.yaml file. So for that, let's go to our GitLab agents, primary agents, and then the config.yaml file. Here, we are going to add the following. So just go ahead, copy paste this in here. And be sure again to add the ID in here. So one way you can do it is either through the URL up top, or since we've already added this in line 6, we can just copy paste this. So this is really just going to that group. So if you are copying from here, for example, just make sure to leave out the Kubernetes agent, which would be specifically our project in here. And so it should look something like this, which you can also see down here, for example, should end with environments, session, and then our specific session ID, and then our specific group. Now, finally, let's go ahead and commit these changes to master by going over to the left-hand side, clicking on source control, commit and push, and choosing no, use the current branch. Great. So let's head over to step 2, adding cluster management. So what we're going to do is, first of all, go back to our project. And then we want to get or use the breadcrumbs in order to get back to the homepage of our group. So for this, for me, this is called my test group, and then this individual string here. So just go ahead and click on this. And then in the left sidebar, as we can see here under step 2, we should go to settings and CI/CD and click on variables. Let's go ahead to settings, CI/CD, and then we see variables over here. So just go ahead and expand that. Now, the first thing that we want to add is the following here. So cube context and the string in here. So what we're going to do in our environment is simply click on add variable. We're going to copy the key. So that's cube context. And then we'll copy the rest of the string in here as well and add that as the value. Now, one thing to make sure is replacing this section in here. So the path to your group and project. For me, all I'm just going to do is go to, for example, a different tab. Let's see here, for example, where I already have this opened to my project, and I will just copy it from the URL up here. So here we can see again, GitLab Learn Labs, environment, session, so our specific session, our specific group, that project that we just had, and then the primary agent. Before we click on add variable, please make sure to have both of these flags disabled. And once we have that, we'll go ahead and add variable. Great. So now we have that variable in here. We can go over to step 4. So click on the name of your group in the top left and get back to the group landing page. So let's go ahead and do that. And then what we're going to do, as mentioned here, is create a new project and create one from a template. So let's click on new project and then click on create from template. Next, what we're going to look for is a template called GitLab Cluster Management. Let's go ahead and look for that. It should be pretty far towards the bottom. And once we've found that, we can click on Use Template. Now for the name, as described in step 6 here, we'll choose Cluster Management. Let's go ahead and copy paste that in here. And yeah, paste it into project name. We'll then go ahead and click on Create Project. Great. So the import is happening right now. This should just take a second. All right, great. So moving on to step number 7. Once we're here, we want to make sure that we click on the Web IDE so that we can make some changes in here. So again, we're in cluster management, and we just go ahead and click on Web IDE. So the first thing we'll do is we will click on the helm file.yaml. And we'll go to line 19 and just make sure to uncomment that. So with that, we've got step 8 finished here, and we can go over to step 9, which is just going ahead and committing these changes. So again, just as we've done before, clicking on source control, clicking commit and push, and choosing no, use the current branch master. So from here, let's go ahead, and once this pop-up comes up, click on go to project. Let's see here. And on the left-hand navigation menu, we can go to CI/CD and pipelines to see this most recent pipeline being kicked off. Let's go ahead on the left-hand side, CI/CD, and then click on pipelines. And here we can see that pipeline that was just spun off because of our changes. So let's go ahead and click on this pipeline. And what we'll do here is just wait for this to finish. So this should happen within like a minute or so, waiting until diff is done. Sure enough, that's already done. And then once that's done, make sure to click on the play button next to sync in here. Great. So again, running our sync job, and this should probably just take another minute or so to finish up. Let's give that some time. I'll go ahead and reload just to see if we're done yet. Almost there. Right. There we go. Okay, job succeeded. So sure enough, if I reload this pipeline, we'll be able to see both of these jobs are done. And with that, we can go ahead and move on to step 3. So now that we have applied our Ingress hem file and we're ready to move on, we can go ahead and open our GCP shell. So that's what we see here over on the left-hand side. And we'll start off by running simple get nodes command in here. I'll go ahead and expand this a little bit. And sure enough, we should see the 3 nodes that are connected. Let's go ahead and print out all of the services as well. The next command. Great. So within the GitLab managed apps namespace, we should look for a service called Ingress Nginx controller. So sure enough, we have this right here. And we're going to go ahead and look for the external IP over here. Please go ahead and make sure to copy that somewhere because we will be using this in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. And with that, we can go ahead and move over to step 4 in here, importing a sample project. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the size of my instruct window here. And from here, let's go back to our group. So again, very simple, just with the breadcrumbs up on the top left, clicking on our group. And then we'll create a sample project by clicking on the new project button in the top right. Again, we'll create this from a template. And this time we will choose the first template here. So the Ruby on Rails template. We'll simply click the use template button. We'll leave everything as is except for the name, which we will call GitOps Rails. So with that change, we can go ahead and click the Create Project button. And again, just wait a few moments for this project to import. And sure enough, all right, we have our project. Now with that, let's go ahead and go to step 5, deploying our application. So what we're going to do is head back to our group and then go back to settings and CI/CD. So again, using the breadcrumbs to click to our group, going to settings, and then heading over to CI/CD. Again, we'll go to the variables section. So go ahead and click the expand button here, and we'll add another variable. Just like before, we will copy the key and paste it in here. And then for the value, do that just like before as well. This time, again, making sure that we're replacing this placeholder here with that external IP address that we just copy pasted. So from our command in here in the GCP shell, that external IP. Great. So with that, just make sure that both flags, again, are disabled and click on the Add Variable button. So with that, we have added that variable, and now let's just go ahead and enable Auto DevOps in our sample project. So go again to your group, to our GitOps Rails project. And here we'll go to settings and CI/CD. Now, as mentioned, what we want to do is enable Auto DevOps in here. So find that, should be the second from the top, and click expand. Click the toggle button to enable the Auto DevOps pipeline. Click on changes. And then again, we'll see here a little window. So deployment strategy. All we'll do here is just click on continuous deployment to production and click save here. So now let's go back to our project. So for that, you can just scroll up to the top and again, use the breadcrumbs to get to our GitOps Rails project. Great. Let's see. And let's open the web IDE in here. Now, what we will do is find the GitLab CI.yaml file. So let's see, that's this one right here. And we'll go ahead and delete this. So I'll go ahead, right click on it, delete. And just like before, commit these changes and push them to our current branch. Now let's go back to our project through the button in the pop-up window on the bottom right. And head over to CI/CD and pipelines to see that we've just now kicked off a pipeline. I'll go ahead and expand this in here. So what we're basically enabled here is Auto DevOps, which automatically applies a variety of different templates in here. So for example, added a build stage and build job, a variety of different tests. So for example, SAS, secret detection, license scanning, and so on. And after that, it will go ahead and spin up a review application for us so that we can do things such as just manually reviewing or running DAST in here. And this will also automatically push these changes then to production as well. Now, this whole process is going to take a while. So with that, what we'll do is head over to step 6 and continue working there on in the meantime. Now, what we'll do here, let's see, is first navigate back to our Kubernetes agent project. So for that, again, use the breadcrumbs, go to that group that we've just created, and click on the Kubernetes agent project. We'll click on Web IDE in here and go back to our configuration in the GitLab agents, primary agents, and config.yaml file. Now, under our CI access groups configuration in here, all we'll do is just add this little piece in here. So environments staging. So really pointing to that and defining that staging environment in here. And again, making sure that we don't make any mistakes with the white spaces. So I think that should look good. All right. And again, click on source control, commit and push. And now we're going to go ahead and push that to our main branch. Let's go back to our project. It's taking a second to load. Now for the very last step, let's head back to our GitOps Rails project. So again, for this, to our group on the top, to our GitOps Rails project, and we go ahead and open the Web IDE. And now within here, let's just head over to apps, or views, welcome, and open the index.html file in here. And we'll just make one quick simple change from hello Rails to hello staging. One other thing that we're going to do is we're going to now go ahead and create a GitLab CI YAML file just to add some configuration in here and see if we can't make this go a little quicker. So we'll add a .GitLab CI.YAML file in here. And we can just go ahead and copy paste all of this into that file. And what we'll do, again, source control, commit and push to our current branch, and head back to our project. And sure enough, if we go back to CI/CD pipelines, we'll see this spins up a brand new instance in here. Now, both of these pipelines are going to take a little bit of time, roughly around 5 to 10 minutes. So I'll say, let's not go ahead and just sit around and wait for that. What I would recommend you do is just wait for that time. And sure enough, if you click on these, you'll see that these are run. And in order to see also the environments that were deployed to, you can also go ahead and click on deployments over here, click on environments, and then you will actually be able to see the different environments in here and the endpoints for that as well. So let's go ahead and move on with the webinar. And I think the next section here, before we conclude the webinar, is just kind of a live Q&A session here. So feel free to ask Lars or me anything that you've seen today that you might have questions about. Yeah. If there are any questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat as of now. So I hope that means that we've done a good job and everything is clear, understandable. If not, yeah, feel free to continue posting in the Q&A section.
See, there's actually one question from Avinash. And the question was, can we use Helm charts from a package registry to deploy via the agent, or should it be a Helm repo configured with proper values and manifest YAMLs. Not sure if I'm following there. If you could elaborate a little bit more, maybe in the chat on what do you mean with the package registry, or what you actually mean with proper values and manifest? Because with the packages, of course, you can still use that. Yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean there. And if not, we can come back with an answer on that.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, feel free to expand on that question in the chat, and then we'll connect that way. 1 second. Let's see, I do see another question in here. Sorry, I think I may not have completed the pull workshop. Do I have to complete the pull base first before going to another workshop, push based?
You do, well, you do in a way, because we configure the agent in the pull based. So you need to finish the pull based configuration before you can do the push based, because else the agent will not be there. Yeah,
exactly. Awesome. So with that, what I would like to do, let's see here. Oh yeah. Before we jump into the conclusions, I did mention how we can go ahead and transfer projects. So we're not going to go into detail into that right here, but you do have access to Instruct. You do still have access to the GitLab environment that we just used. And so what you can do is follow those Instruct steps in order to transfer. One thing to note though, however, is that what you've been using here is the GitLab Ultimate instance, right? And so if you are transferring to another GitLab instance, make sure that it also leverages GitLab Ultimate. Otherwise, you might potentially be losing some features and functionality in there. And one thing to note, but I do want to highlight this again, I think Lars mentioned it initially, you still have access to this GitLab instance, right? So feel free to not just play around with this, but use some of our other features. So for example, a lot of AI has become a very interesting topic, and feel free to also experiment with the features and functionalities that we have around AI while you still have access to GitLab Ultimate. So now with that, let's go ahead and conclude this webinar. So first of all, and I think this was a question that was brought up a little bit earlier around Flux. So it is true, we are currently working on a Flux integration, which is currently in beta. And with this, we're trying to really make sure that we offer a wide variety of amazing best-in-class GitOps solutions. Now, with this integration, you can go ahead and keep your cluster in sync with your Git repositories, reconcile code changes with your deployments, and manage your Flux installation itself with a Bootstrap. Now, that being said, we are not deprecating any agent for Kubernetes functionality like we saw today at this point. This will stay fully functional and we'll just transition to maintenance mode. And if we do eventually decide to move away from the agent, we'll make sure to give you at least 1 year warning ahead of time, and we'll also provide a very detailed migration guide. Finally, I would like to mention 2 of our customers who have used GitLab for GitOps, one of them being Serit Tromsø. I hope I'm not completely mispronouncing that. But yeah, they were able to really leverage GitLab for GitOps, and it really helped them improve their deployment process. So they initially were deploying maybe once every 2 days, and by leveraging GitLab for GitOps, they were able to deploy multiple times within a single day. What this also helped them to do is really deal with tracking and auditing of changes. And because this was made a lot easier, it was easier for them to also achieve their compliance requirements. Our second customer is Bottomline. who was able to improve operational efficiency by leveraging automation in environment creation and maintenance. They were able to better their inner sourcing and collaboration by allowing members to use, collaborate, improve tool sets, since everything is really standardized and within version control. And finally, they were able to extend beyond Kubernetes to do such things as using Git for storing a single source of truth, using approval rules, and automatically pushing changes. So how do you get started? Well, first of all, one thing that we notice is a lot of organizations start their GitOps journey by version controlling their infrastructure, their policies, and configuration definitions. Next would be implementing controls. So access controls, target environment controls, review, and approvals, which really helps ensure everything is protected. The last step is adding automation, both for your testing and deployment to improve speed. Improved speed of deployments and rollbacks, as well as the scale to support the ever-changing and growing enterprise infrastructure. So with that, I would like to close up this workshop and would like to thank you all for attending. I hope this was helpful, and I really look forward